Her photo wasn't supposed to be seen like that. It wasn't a moment she volunteered to share. It was stolen, spread, mocked, reposted with cruel words she'd never spoken and laughter she couldn't stop. Her face, her actual face, became the punchline of strangers who never met her, never knew her name, never cared to learn her story. Imagine walking through your day and suddenly realizing the world is laughing at something you cannot change. They thought the camera would silence her. They thought if they laughed hard enough, pointed long enough, and commented loud enough, she'd disappear. But she didn't. She watched. She read every cruel word. She heard the giggles behind phones and saw the reposts that turned her pain into punchlines. And then she turned the camera around. Not to perform, not to defend, but to reclaim the story they tried to write for her. You see, when the internet turned her face into a meme, they weren't just attacking her features. They were trying to erase her personhood. They weren't mocking an image. They were trying to convince her that she didn't belong in this world unless she fit their version of beauty, normalcy, or acceptance. And for a moment, just a flicker of a moment, it almost worked. Almost until something inside her rose. Until something inside her rose. A quiet but undeniable voice that whispered, "You are more than they say, and you are not here to shrink." So instead of running from the light, she stepped into it. Instead of letting the mic go mute, she turned up the volume on her truth. And that choice, that defiant, healing, liberating choice didn't just save her voice. It gave millions of others the courage to use theirs. Because when one person decides that shame will no longer narrate their story, it sets off a chain reaction of freedom. Let's talk about the 4 key choices she made that turned her pain into power. Choices you can make too. 1, she rewrote the labels. They called her everything. Words no soul should ever have to hear, let alone carry. But she realized that just because someone throws a label at you doesn't mean you have to wear it. You can set it down, burn it, rewrite it. When the world said unlovable, she said unshakable. When they said ugly, she said unique. When they mocked her face, she revealed her fire. She stopped asking the world who she was and started declaring it herself. And that is the first miracle. The power to choose the words that define you. If someone walked up to you and handed you a rotten gift, would you keep it? Then why keep their insult? Reject them. Return to sender. Return to sender. You are not what they say. You are what you know deep in your bones to be true. She knew it too, and so she rewrote her reflection with words of worth. 2, she took the stage. Before she felt ready, it would have been easy to say, "I'll speak once I feel healed. I'll share once I feel confident. I'll show up once the fear is gone." But she didn't wait to feel brave. She moved as if she already was. And the stage, the mic, the moment, the message met her halfway. Sometimes courage doesn't show up fully bloomed. Sometimes it begins as a tremble, a whisper, a shaky yes, and that's enough. When she first took the mic, her voice cracked. But her truth didn't. And as she kept speaking, her voice got louder. Not because she stopped being scared, but because she stopped letting fear drive. So many of us are waiting to feel ready. But she proved readiness is a myth. The people who change the world, they move anyway. And in moving, they discover the strength was there all along. 3, she shared the pain without letting it own her. She didn't hide what it felt like. She talked about the nights she cried until her heart went numb. The days when she couldn't look in the mirror without hearing echoes of hate. But she told it all from the other side of the fire, as someone who walked through it, not someone still trapped in it. That's power. To be honest, but not hopeless. To speak of suffering, but still shine through it. To tell the truth and testify to healing. There is someone out there right now who needs your story, not your perfection. Not your filtered moments, but your real, cracked open, healing, alive truth. She knew that, so she stopped hiding. And in doing so, she gave permission to millions to finally be seen. Your story, even the parts that still sting, can be a lifeline to someone drowning in silence. Don't underestimate what your honesty might heal. 4, she didn't just survive, she served. The hate didn't break her. Still service. It birthed her purpose. She could have walked away from it all and disappeared into a quiet life, but she chose instead to turn her pain into purpose. She didn't want revenge. She wanted redemption for herself and for anyone who's ever been mocked, misunderstood, or made to feel like they didn't belong. She realized the very wound they tried to give her became the doorway through which she would heal others. And that's the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting stays stuck in pain. Responding builds something with it. So she didn't fight with fists. She fought with light. She fought with truth. She fought with the power of being fully, unapologetically, unshakably herself. And in doing so, she created a movement. She didn't just tell the world, "You won't silence me." She proved it. With every step, with every speech, with every time she looked in the mirror and smiled. Not because she fit their standard, but because she loved her own. They told her to shrink, to soften, to blur her edges, cover her scars, dim her brightness. All because when they looked at her, they saw something they didn't understand, so they mocked it, clicked on it, commented on it, shared it like a warning. They stared at her like she was the problem, but never questioned the lens they were seeing through. But she didn't shatter. Her reflection wasn't built on their comfort. It wasn't formed to please their shallow sight. She was born with a light the world had no language for. And instead of folding, she finally stood still and stared back into her own mirror, into her own heart, and said, "I don't owe you beautiful. I owe myself truth." And she stopped asking permission to belong. Because she realized something life-changing. What they couldn't accept in her was the exact thing that made her sacred. They wanted her to edit herself into invisibility, but she chose instead to become even more visible. They called it defiance. She called it freedom. She didn't just survive their judgment. She used it to rise. She refused to apologize for reflection, and that decision changed everything. One, they threw labels. She built a legacy they tried to name her. Not with love, not with light, but with labels that stung like thorns. Ugly labels that stung like thorns. Ugly, unworthy. You so much. Not enough. And with every word, they hoped to bury her beneath shame. But what they didn't understand was, she was made of soil that grows stronger with pressure. She didn't silence their words by shouting louder. She silenced them by living louder. They gave her reasons to hide, but she found reasons to hope. They wanted her to break under the weight of their opinions, but she grew roots. She decided that every insult thrown at her could either become a wound or a brick. She chose bricks, and brick by brick she built a life not defined by other people's opinions, but by her own belief. She took the labels off one by one and put on identity, worthiness, purpose, voice, legacy. She made peace with her face, and in doing so, she made peace with her life. 2, she didn't fit their mold, so she broke it. They had a script for beauty, a template for what was acceptable, and she didn't fit it. Her features didn't follow the rules. Her story didn't play the way they wanted. And when the world tries to force you into a box you don't fit, it will try to convince you that you are the mistake. But she knew better. She realized that molds aren't sacred, souls are, and you don't owe the world sameness just to make them comfortable. So she stopped trying to shrink into their standards. She stopped dressing her pain in fake smiles. She stopped contorting her worth to match their timelines. Instead, she stood tall in her own body. She began showing up on camera, not to seek validation, but to claim space. She didn't filter her truth. She didn't blur her scars. She let the world see the real her, uncut and uncensored. And suddenly, people didn't just see a face. They saw fire. They saw fire. They saw courage. They saw themselves. 3. Her healing didn't need their approval. People think healing is applause. That when enough people are like you, it'll erase the damage. But she learned early validation isn't the cure. Healing isn't a reaction. Healing is a choice, a decision, a discipline. She didn't need their agreement to start her journey. She needed her own permission. So she gave it. She gave herself permission to grieve without guilt, to cry without shame, to rest without apology. She gave herself permission to forgive, not for them, but for her freedom, And every time she chose compassion over comparison, she grew. Every time she chose hope over hiding, she rose. Every time she looked in the mirror and said, "I still choose you," she rewrote the narrative. Healing didn't mean she forgot the pain. It meant she refused to let the pain make her forget herself. 4. She spoke until silence had no power. The world tried to mute her, to take her voice and turn it into a punchline. But the very moment she decided to speak, to use her story as a torch instead of a wound, that silence lost its grip. She didn't speak perfectly, she didn't always speak confidently, but she spoke. She took the mic back from every bully, every troll, every whisper behind her back, and turned it into a message that healed millions. Her voice wasn't an echo of expectations, it was an anthem of authenticity. It didn't ask for sympathy, it demanded visibility. And slowly, the world that once mocked her began to listen, because her power didn't come from looking like everyone else. Her power came from finally seeing herself. Let them stare. Let them stare. Let them misunderstand. Let them scroll past. Because she didn't come to Earth to fit in, she came to shine through. She refused to apologize for her reflection, because she realized her reflection wasn't broken. It was rare. And now, the same world that tried to silence her is listening for her next word. It was listening for her next word. They looked at her story and saw something broken. They pointed, whispered, screenshotted, and laughed. Like her pain was a punchline, and her face was a warning. They saw a girl they thought they could tear down with a comment, a stare, or a cruel meme. But what they didn't know was that she had already been through battles they couldn't even pronounce. Every scar they thought disqualified her was actually a sword she had sharpened in silence. And while the world judged her by surface, she had been forging something deeper. An identity rooted in worth that didn't ask for their permission to stand tall. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, wondering if maybe, just maybe, the world was right. Maybe she didn't belong. Maybe she should stay quiet, disappear, or shrink into the shadows just to make everyone else comfortable. But that maybe died the day she looked in the mirror and saw more than flaws. She saw fire. She saw a girl who had survived rejection, ridicule, loneliness, and judgment, and was still here, still standing, still trying, still loving, still rising. And that girl didn't need the world's approval. That girl needed her own voice, and so she stopped waiting to be accepted and started showing up as if she already was. Because she realized something no comment could take away. Her story was not a scar to hide. It was a sword to lift. They called her names, but she named herself enough. They threw shame at her, but she caught it midair and turned it into strength. They tried to define her by her lowest moments, but she decided her worth would be defined by her highest truth. And the truth was, she was not here by accident. She was here on purpose. With purpose for purpose. For purpose. And when you wake up to that kind of truth, something shifts. The pain doesn't disappear, but it loses its power to silence you. Because pain that once tried to bury her had now become the platform she stood on. And when she spoke, it wasn't just her voice that shook the room. It was every silent girl watching, every unheard story listening, every person waiting for permission to feel seen. She became proof that you don't have to be pretty by their standards to be powerful by your own. She didn't ask for a stage, but when they gave her one by accident, she took the mic with purpose. And when she spoke, she didn't speak to impress. She spoke to set people free. Free from shame, from the lie that appearance is identity, from the illusion that worth comes from likes, followers, or filters. She didn't preach perfection. She lived raw, honest, unfiltered strength. In a world obsessed with image, she became a mirror of truth. You don't have to look like the world to lead it. You don't have to fit the mold to be a masterpiece. You don't have to hide your difference to be worthy of love, respect, and belonging. It's you then, and maybe that's what hurt them the most. She didn't apologize for surviving. She didn't tone it down. She didn't ask, am I too much? She decided that too much was exactly enough for the mission she had, because healing doesn't mean forgetting. Healing means remembering without reliving. It means holding your past like a torch, not a chain. And that's what she did. She carried her story like a sword, not to attack, but to protect others who were walking through the same fire she once did. She stood in her truth, so others could stand in theirs. And with every speech, every smile, every act of boldness, she proved this. They tried to make her story the end, but she made it the beginning. The first power she claimed was voice. When the world handed her silence as a coping mechanism, she broke it open and said no more. Because silence never healed a wound. She spoke her truth, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. When she said, "This happened to me," what she really said was, "This doesn't have to happen to someone else." She turned her pain into permission for others to speak, to feel, to heal. They knew that one honest voice is more powerful than 1,000 fake ones. And when her voice shook, she didn't stop. She kept going, because trembling truth is still truth. And truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be lived. It just needs to be lived. The second power she embraced was ownership. They tried to make her feel like her story was a burden, but she decided it was a banner, something to carry, to wave, to wear like armor. She didn't erase her journey. She elevated it. She owned every chapter, even the ones that still hurt. Because when you own your past, it loses the power to own you. She didn't run from the mirror anymore. She walked toward it, smiled, and said, "This is me, and I'm not changing for your comfort." That level of self-love is dangerous to a world that profits from our insecurity. Insecurity. But she was done being profitable for someone else's standard. She became her own definition. The third power she activated was compassion, not just for others, but for herself. That inner voice that used to echo every insult finally softened. She learned to speak to herself like someone she loved. Someone she loved. And that was revolutionary. She stopped waiting for someone else to be kind first. She went first, and that kindness became a weapon. Not the weak kind, but the healing kind. The kind that says, "I don't have to be bitter to be better." She didn't need revenge. She needed redemption, and she found in self-forgiveness, grace, and the quiet courage to begin again every day. And the final power she embodied was legacy. Because she knew that if she kept showing up, kept telling her story, kept speaking, even when her voice cracked, she wouldn't just be surviving. She'd be rewriting the rules. For every girl who felt like a shadow, every boy who thought different meant defective, every person who mistook visibility for value, she became a beacon, not because she had it all figured out, but because she refused to let hate have the last word. Her story didn't end with what they did to her. It began with what she did next, and what she did was rise. She rose for the overlooked. She rose for the bullied. She rose for the outcast. She rose with a heart still bruised, but wide open. She rose not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Her scars didn't vanish, but they stopped bleeding, and in their place something holy grew. A story that didn't just survive the fire, it carried the flame forward. That they said the internet is ruthless, and they were right. But what they forgot is that the human heart can be braver than any algorithm. What they forgot is that one girl, armed not with cruelty but with compassion, not with revenge but with resolve, could stand taller than an entire world trying to shrink her. She didn't ask to be mocked. She didn't volunteer to be a punchline. Her face went viral for the wrong reason, but her fight, that went global for the right one. The moment they turned a camera into a weapon, she chose to turn her voice into a lighthouse. She could have gone silent, could have disappeared, believing the cruelest things people said about her. But she didn't. She stood up, not to strike back, but to stand firm. Not to hate, but to heal. Because real courage isn't screaming louder than your enemies. Real courage is whispering love in a room full of hate. It's smiling when they try to shame you. It's showing up when they hoped you would stay invisible. And that's exactly what she did. Every day, every step, every scar they thought they broke her with, she built with. And with every word she spoke, the lie of shame shattered. She fought with love, and that's why she won. Because love is louder, love is stronger. And love does not need permission to transform pain into power. She didn't let their poison make her bitter. She let it make her braver. They threw insults like daggers, thinking they could cut her down, but she didn't pick up the same weapons, just to She picked up purpose. She used their poison not as a reason to hide, but as fuel to rise. There's a difference between breaking and bending, and though she bent under the weight of the world's judgment, she never snapped. Instead, she planted herself deeper and hid herself deeper. She anchored her worth in something beyond their words. You see, love is not weakness. It is resistance. It is rebellion in a world that teaches you to fight pain with more pain. She chose a harder path. Not the path of ease, but the path of integrity. Not the path of revenge, but the road of redemption. And it was love that made her brave enough to keep going, even when no applause followed, even when silence was louder than the hate. Because she wasn't performing. She was healing. And when the world asked, why don't you hit back? Why don't you hit back? She answered with a smile, because love already won. She made peace with her reflection and refused to see herself through their eyes. It would have been so easy to believe them, to believe the cruel comments, the distorted images, the hashtags that dehumanized her. But one day, she looked in the mirror not to critique, not to correct, but to reclaim. She realized something powerful. She was never created to fit their filters. She was not born to shrink into someone else's expectations. She was born to expand the world's idea of what beauty looks like, what strength feels like, what grace under fire really means.